Hi, Julie. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Shout out to Julie. Julie L. Shout out to Holly. Thank you, Juliet. I appreciate it. I'm glad you like my channel. Shout out to Juliet. Thank you. Shout out to Milo. Welcome. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Tatum. Shout out to Sunday. Hello, welcome. Shout out to Lou. Shout out to Hello Kitty. Shout out to, is it Mexica? Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Millie. Shout out to Carlos. Shout out to Milkshake. Shout out to Jake. Shout out to Hilda. Shout out to Yotsna. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Bailey. Shout out to Maya. Yatsna say, oh, I'm so sorry. Jayotsna? Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Please forgive me. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Charlotte. Shout out to Sydney. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Yoon Jin. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Manvi. Shout out to Rin. Shout out to Moriah. Shout out to Gracie. Shout out to Carmelo. Shout out to Autumn. Shout out to Presley. If I haven't gotten to your name, write your name in the chat so I can shout you out. Shout out to Fairy Yell. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Aitana. Shout out to Hermione. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Leland. Shout out to Miracle. Shout out to Alexis. Shout out to Vani. Shout out to Maya. Shout out to Rosalia. Shout out to Toby. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Vanjie. Shout out to Shakila. Shout out to Yamilet. Shout out to Tayana. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Shalo. Or Shalo. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Kylie. Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Tiana. Shout out to Cindy. Shout out to Taraya. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Mace. Shout out to Maya. Shout out to Lucille. Shout out to Chelsea. Shout out to Sydney. Shout out to Max. Shout out to Sari. Shout out to Jacob. Shout out to Ava. Shout out to Kennedy. Shout out to Jacoby. Shout out to Greshi. Shout out to Adelina. Shout out to Harper. Shout out to Paris. Shout out to Cassidy. Shout out to, you're welcome, Adelina. Shout out to Angel and Chloe. Shout out to Maddie. Shout out to Natty. Shout out to Monique. You're welcome, Aitana. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Charlotte. Shout out to Lily. Shout out to Lisa. Shout out to O'Neill. Shout out to Gabby. Shout out to Natty. Shout out to Aaliyah. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Floretta. Shout out to, thank you, Aitana. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Flynn. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to Sunny. Shout out to Ziva. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Thank you so much for subscribing. Shout out to Manvi. Happy birthday. Shout out to Mike's. Shout out to Jocelyn. Shout out to Abby. Shout out to Bentley. Write your name again if I haven't gotten to you. Shout out to Hadley. Shout out to Fiona. Shout out to Xavier. Shout out to Nicole. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Arvi. Shout out to Addie. Shout out to Millie. Shout out to Kenzie. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Taylor. Shout out to these people. A lot of you are writing really nice things. I really appreciate it. I wish I could respond to everyone, but I want to say thank you so much. Those of you that are writing really nice comments, I appreciate it. And it means a lot. I try to read them as fast as I can, but sometimes I can't because the chat goes really fast. But thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. It means a lot. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Thank you so much for being here. Shout out to Lyric. Oh, that looks like an E. Let me write it again. Shout out to Lyric. Oh my gosh, it did it again. Okay, give me 1 second. Hold on. Keep messing up. I'm gonna just try again. Okay, here we go. Shout out to Lyric. There we go. Much better. Shout out to, is it Greshi? Shout out to Greshi. Shout out to Shreya. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Oliver. Shout out to Harper. Shout out to Maham. Shout out to Leia. Shout out to Lila. Shout out to Aubrey. Shout out to Lila. Oh, I got Lila. Shout out to Michael. Shout out to Ashreet. Shout out to Aitana. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Sadie. Whoopsie. Let me write that again. Shout out to Sadie. Shout out to Autumn. Shout out to Talise. Thank you. Shout out to Samari. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Kimoy. Shout out to Miriam. Shout out to Hawa. Shout out to Naomi. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Ariel. Shout out to Addison. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Thank you so much for your patience. Shout out to Aria. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Andressa. Shout out to Zoya. Shout out to Lisa. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Demila. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Verna. Shout out to Adeline, or Adeline. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Elisa. Shout out to Taya. Shout out to Sky. Shout out to Sandy. Shout out to Saifullah. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Titus. Shout out to Amila. Shout out to Paige. Shout out to, is it Tiana? Shout out to Alay or Eli. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Terrell or Terrell. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Ryan. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Jocelyn. Shout out to Lincoln. Shout out to Noel. Shout out to Safa. Shout out to Kimoy. Shout out to Safa, I got you. Shout out to Arlette. Shout out to Carolina. Shout out to Maven. Shout out to Leo. Shout out to Tiara. Bye, Atana. Thank you for stopping by. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Miles. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to, is it Sia? Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Ariel. Shout out to Delilah. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Jaylee. Shout out to Ashlyn. Shout out to Haku. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Jenna. Shout out to Rai. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Nakari. Shout out to Araya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Heather. Shout out to Karima. Shout out to Joe Jonas. Shout out to Taylor. Shout out to Zailani. Shout out to Nova. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Abby. Shout out to Bailey. Shout out to Hayden. Shout out to Asel. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Monse. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Sunny. Shout out to Kyle. Shout out to Jericho. Shout out to Nyla. Shout out to Nora. Shout out to Manha. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Indy. Shout out to Desi. Shout out to Jalen. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to what was it? Zaya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Zariah. Shout out to Vivian. Shout out to Gracie. Shout out to Luna. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Taylin. Shout out to Zaya. Oh, thank you, Zaya. Thank you for showing me how to write your name or pronounce your name. Shout out to Ian. Shout out to these people. Sorry, thank you for your patience. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. If I haven't gotten to you, please write your name again. Thank you so much for being here. Shout out to Olive. Shout out to Jax. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Valentina. Shout out to Yunche. Shout out to Evangeline. Shout out to Sienna. Shout out to Melanie. Shout out to Zoe. Shout out to Amari. Shout out to Laura. Shout out to Paisley. Shout out to Renicia. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to, is it Tasha? Tasha? Shout out to Harper. Shout out to Janelle. Shout out to Vicky. Shout out to Winston. Shout out to Al Shukri. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Baylor. Shout out to Connor. Shout out to Leech. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Mallory. Shout out to Omar. Shout out to Miriam. Shout out to Larissa. Shout out to Audrey. Shout out to Samantha. Shout out to Journey. Shout out to Porter. Shout out to Abigail. Shout out to Moki, or Mochi. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Gigi. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Moon. Shout out to Lavender. Shout out to Ali. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Roshane. Shout out to Dustin. Shout out to Kai. Shout out to Tiana. Shout out to Venice. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Jax. Shout out to Cassie. Shout out to, was it Eduarda? Eduarda. Shout out to Icon. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Adeline. Shout out to Abrielle, or Abrielle. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to, oh no, I missed it. Madison. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Matthew. Shout out to Andrew. Shout out to Paris. Shout out to Nyla. Shout out to Paulette. Shout out to Jordy. Shout out to Bo. Shout out to Chris. Shout out to Arwin. Shout out to Camille. Shout out to Brooke. Shout out to Mies. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Jalen. Shout out to Roshane. Shout out to Layla. Shout out to, was it Schmidt? Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Kimberly. Shout out to Alonso. Shout out to Thomas. Shout out to Stephanie. Shout out to Angel. Shout out to Mackenzie. Shout out to Allison. Shout out to Faithful. Shout out to Mohib. Happy birthday. Shout out to, was it Gracelyn? Gracelyn. Shout out to Fernando. Shout out to Lily. Shout out to Rose. Shout out to Roxy. Shout out to Tommy. Shout out to Christian. Shout out to Kaya. Shout out to Elizabeth. Shout out to Sebastian. Shout out to Gracie. Shout out to Miles. Shout out to Joy. Shout out to Freya. Shout out to McKenna. Shout out to Bailey. Shout out to, was it Alexa? Shout out to Denise. Shout out to Apollo. Shout out to Kayla. Shout out to Macy. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Gia. Shout out to Lola. Shout out to Ryan. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Thank you so much for being here. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Gemma. Shout out to Marley. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Rodrigo. Shout out to Daniela. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Amia or Amaya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Bernie. Shout out to Core. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Aitana. Shout out to Savannah. Shout out to Dax. Shout out to London. Shout out to Blessy. Shout out to Mia. Whoops. Shout out to Rachel. Shout out to Caroline. Shout out to Soraya. Shout out to Olivia. Shout out to Jimmy. Shout out to Aisha. Shout out to Polly. Shout out to Alex. Shout out to Insane. Shout out to Valentino. Shout out to Morgan. Shout out to David. Shout out to Emily. Shout out to Kaylee. Shout out to Harmony. Shout out to Josiah. Shout out to Allison. Shout out to Genesis. Shout out to Kaya. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Kaylin. Shout out to Grayson. Shout out to Xavier. Shout out to Alejandro. Shout out to Paulette. Shout out to Faith. Shout out to Josie. Shout out to Alexis. Shout out to Linda. Shout out to Andy. Shout out to Freya. Thank you for showing me how to pronounce your name. Shout out to Brooklyn. Shout out to Isaiah. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Ava. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to Samari. Shout out to Phoenix. Shout out to Allie. Shout out to Jameson. Shout out to Kennedy. Shout out to Nicole. Shout out to Jesse. Shout out to Ariana. Shout out to Alfonso. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Atani. Did I spell it correctly? I hope I did. Shout out to Ariel. Shout out to Jen. Shout out to Annalisa. Shout out to Cam. Shout out to Ash. Shout out to Alex. Shout out to Mario. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Amar. Shout out to Emma. Shout out to Skylar. Shout out to Victoria. Shout out to Alina. Shout out to Anthony. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Fabiola. I'm gonna put your name over here so it fits. Shout out to Zoe. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Wendy. Shout out to Lena. Shout out to Camila. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Juliana. Shout out to Kendall. Shout out to Luke. Shout out to Natalie. Shout out to Anissa. Shout out to Jamal. Shout out to Juan. Shout out to Mia. Shout out to Cooper. Shout out to Chelsea. Whoops, how do you spell Chelsea? Chelsea, oh, there we go. Shout out to Chelsea. There we go. Shout out to Riley. Shout out to James. Shout out to Paula. Shout out to Jaden. Shout out to Evie, or Evie. Sorry if I mispronounced her name. Shout out to Wendy. Shout out to Trey. Shout out to Lorenzo. Shout out to these people. On to the next page. Whoops. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. Shout out to Carly. Shout out to Kingston. Shout out to Gabriella. Shout out to Mandy. Shout out to Rainier. Shout out to Jaden. Shout out to Aubrey. Shout out to Dylan. Shout out to Diego. Shout out to Brayden. Shout out to Brianna. Shout out to Joella. Shout out to Wendy. Shout out to Matt. Shout out to Lainey. Shout out to Hunter. Shout out to Boston. Shout out to Amaya. Shout out to Jolisa. Shout out to Rebecca. Shout out to Maddie. Shout out to Danelli. Shout out to Deleza. Sorry if I mispronounced her name. Shout out to Tiffany. Shout out to Kyrie or Kiri. Sorry if I mispronounced her name. Shout out to Christian. Shout out to Isaac. Shout out to Farah. Shout out to Chloe. Shout out to Kyson. Or Kaysen, sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Reagan. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Aaliyah. Shout out to Jack. Shout out to Ryan. Shout out to Hannah. Shout out to Ashley. Shout out to Regina. Shout out to Skylar. Shout out to Bradley. Shout out to Zeta. Shout out to Ruzi. Shout out to Paula. Shout out to Lucy. Shout out to Abel. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Andrea. Shout out to Ronan. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Yuki. Shout out to Blakely. Shout out to Carlton. Shout out to Ariel. Shout out to Ember. Shout out to Dion. Shout out to Karina. Shout out to Kyle. Shout out to Dustin. Shout out to Amari. Shout out to Zaran. Shout out to Angel. Shout out to Quinn. Shout out to Eviana. Shout out to Cindy. Shout out to Mesa. Shout out to Juan. Shout out to Savannah. Shout out to Natalie. Shout out to Amelia. Shout out to Jameson. Shout out to Noah. Thank you for your support. Shout out to Cadence. Shout out to Maria. Shout out to Melina. Shout out to Penelope. Shout out to Jaden. Shout out to Edwin. Shout out to Josiah. Shout out to Nikki. Shout out to Jasmine. I'm gonna write Nikki again because it kind of looks wonky. Shout out to Nikki. There we go, much better. Shout out to Reed. Shout out to Royal. Shout out to Alan. Shout out to Fernanda. Shout out to Timothy. Shout out to Julia. Shout out to Lucas. Shout out to Carmen. Shout out to Lishai. Shout out to Daniel. Shout out to Sadie. Shout out to Addie. Shout out to Sage. Shout out to Yusuf. Shout out to Katarina. Shout out to Richard. Shout out to Alexia. Shout out to Anne. Shout out to Everly. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to these people. Give me 20 seconds. I'll be right back. Thank you so much for your patience. On to the next page. Thank you so much for being here. Write your name in the chat if you want me to shout you out. And also thank you for your patience. Write your name again if I haven't gotten to you. Shout out to Sarah. Shout out to Aylin. Or Eileen, sorry. Shout out to Santana. Shout out to Juan. Shout out to Aiden. Shout out to Jace. Shout out to Mike. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Anna. Shout out to Carly. Shout out to Elena. Shout out to Adeline. Shout out to Emmy. Shout out to Jera. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Isabel. Shout out to Remy. Shout out to Richard. Shout out to Skylar. Shout out to Angelina. Shout out to, was it Miriam? Shout out to Layla. Shout out to Deliora. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Stone. Shout out to Karina. Shout out to Celeste. Shout out to Daisy. Shout out to Maite. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Spencer. Shout out to Jimena. Shout out to Ramon. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Nala. Shout out to Diana. Shout out to Christian. Shout out to Jocelyn. Shout out to Isa. Shout out to Gunisha. Shout out to Skylar. Shout out to Isabella. I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thank you for asking. Shout out to Lauren. Shout out to, is it Philip? Whoops, Philip. 2 L's. Philip. Shout out to Danya. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Kings. Shout out to Sophia. Shout out to Mila. Shout out to Julia. Shout out to, is it Ali? Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Ruthann. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Brooklyn. Shout out to Sammy. Shout out to Lachelle. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Colson. Shout out to Denisa. Shout out to Ryan. Shout out to Amara. Shout out to Kelly. Shout out to Piper. Shout out to Alexa. Shout out to Peyton. Shout out to Oleana. Shout out to Eshi. Shout out to Andrew. Shout out to Melissa. Shout out to Reese. I'm gonna write Andrew again because I messed up right there. Shout out to Andrew. There we go. Shout out to Redane. Shout out to Kendall. Shout out to Katrina. Shout out to, was it Damien? Shout out to Kyrie. Shout out to Sylvie. Shout out to Jackson. Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Frankie. Shout out to Marjorie. Shout out to Efim. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to, was it Casey? Shout out to Ray. Shout out to Anna. Shout out to Gia. Shout out to Nadia. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Amari. Shout out to Liam. Shout out to Jandal. Sorry if I mispronounce your name. Shout out to Liv. Shout out to Jasmine. Shout out to Makar. Shout out to Salim. Shout out to Megan. Shout out to Leilani. Shout out to Raylan. Or Rylan. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Isabella. Shout out to Lucky. Shout out to... You're welcome, Megan. Shout out to Maddox. Shout out to Jalitza. Shout out to Avery. Shout out to Carson. Shout out to Dakari. Shout out to Tony. Or Tani. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Arjun. Or Arjan. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to Gia. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Shout out to these people. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy my shout outs. I also post other content. I hope you can check it out as well. Thank you so much for being here. I know I normally live stream every day. So please subscribe if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much for being here. Take care. I will see you next time. Leave a like. Bye.